Hey, everybody. Before we get into the show, I just wanted to make a little announcement. Light Up the Darkness is now selling merch. If you want to show your love and support for this podcast, please visit merch.lutdpodcast.com. With the seasons changing and the kids going back to school, maybe you need a new tote bag or a mug or a water bottle. Well, visit merch.lutdpodcast.com and you can purchase one. You'll not only be showing your support of my show, maybe you'll get something you need out of it as well. So with that, let's get into the episode. Welcome to Light Up the Darkness podcast. Today's guest is Hakim Pitts. Hakim is a native of North Philly, a Black genderqueer creative entrepreneur whose work is situated at the nexus of visual culture, social justice and community care, and spiritual activism and wellness. And I can't wait to hear more about all of that. So Hakim, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be a guest and, that you invited me. I'm super excited to be here and to chit chat. It's one of my favorite things to do.
Yes. I love watching your IG lives. They're awesome and so engaging. So I can't wait to actually speak to you back and forth.
Thank you.
So can you start out by introducing yourself, a little bit about your background and what your work is?
Yes, thank you so much for asking. So I feel it's right to give my full name because it gives credibility and location to my ancestors. So my full name is Sultan Hakim Pitts, Sultan meaning sovereign, royal, an Arabic name, and Hakim translating to wise counselor or doctor. And so it's a powerful, powerful name that I got from my father. I am a junior. And yes, I'm from North Philadelphia, in particular, an area that is called Erie Ave. So literally I was born into a mob, Erie Avenue mob. And so I'm very, very proud of where I come from, coming from North Philadelphia, an area that, went through many, many phases as many, even global, but specifically national Black metropolises that went through the phases of white flight, and having this moment of thriving in the 70s, where Black people and other people of color, felt this sense of community, especially in the wake and on the heels of so many policy, so much policy for Black rights. And so my grandmother moved to that area in the 60s, and my great-grandmother as well. And so that's where I grew up. But by the time I came of age in the 90s, it was like many, many other cities, riddled with lots of crime and dilapidation and divestment from schools, from all the important things that we need. And yet there was so much beauty and gloriousness because, hello, I emerged, right?
Exactly.
And so that's where my roots are from, ancestrally speaking. On my mother's side, the folks are from North and South Carolina, both on my mom's side and my mom's dad's side. And so we're those up South people who migrated to the North for opportunities, right?
Like so many of us.
So many of us. I was looking at census records and seeing my great-grandmother in the 20s, making her way from Charlotte, North Carolina to Philadelphia and somehow finding her way, right? So she was the matriarch of our family and created a lot of stability for her two children, who each had 8 children, to come and to dwell and to make Philadelphia home. So I'm really grateful and proud of that wonderful heritage.
Those deep roots in Philly.
Yes.
Love it. Okay. So I mentioned in my intro that you work in spiritual activism, and you also call yourself a spiritualist. So when did you decide to pursue that as your own practice, and why?
I think spiritualist, right, and common parlance is like an accessible word. We start developing these buzzwords and spaces and places, and I think it means something different for every single person.
Right.
As a spiritualist, right, for me, there is a commitment to the life of spirit. There's a commitment, like personally, relationally, professionally, spiritually, right? And as I started to engage more in spiritual practices, particularly in my I'm 34 now, and started to provide services for people. Like I wanted to give people an entry point into who I am. But in terms of like the genesis of identifying as that, I've always been like what I call a God chaser. I've always had this very deep and profound relationship with the divine as early as I can remember. I cannot recall a time in my life where I did not feel connected to the divine, feel connected to what we call God. And that was hugely a part of my shaping as a person, growing up in Philadelphia as a young person, hugely had a huge impact on who I became as a creative and an artist. I was in the arts and I experienced the divine. And at that time, I started going to church very early on, like at 8 or 9 years old by myself. And my aunt would take me. Like it wasn't something that my mother or my grandmother said, oh, you have to go. I did see my great grandmother, whose name is Rebecca Guest, Ibaye, who was from Charlotte, North Carolina. She was, a church goer. And if she couldn't go to church, her church came to her, right? Which was also something that stuck with me. And how I saw it in my life at that time was that like there was this force working in the universe, right, who I had relation with, right, who cared about me deeply and who was with me all the time, and that like I could always engage. And so that was something that absolutely fascinated me as a child. And so I went to church on my own and immediately became incredibly active in it, because as I look back now, the church of my youth, Baraka Baptist Church, which is part of the Progressive Baptist National Convention, and pastored by Reverend Dr. Robert P. Shine, Ibaye.
Can I pause you for one? When you say Ibaye, for those who don't know, what are you doing?
Yes. So that's such a great question. I am a practitioner, a spiritual practitioner, spiritualist, as we're speaking about, who is rooted in what I call many Black Atlantic religions, right? So religions that have been created, emerged, and or sustained like in the Black Atlantic. So Black people in their relation to the Atlantic Ocean. One of them is, which is called many things throughout the diaspora, Isheshe on the continent, Regla de Ocha, right? And so I am a practitioner of Yoruba-based spirituality. And so Ibaye Tonu, right, is us giving reverence and light to those ancestors, right, those who've come before us in our family line, but also communal ancestors, because to not remember them is the actual death, right? As long as we can remember their names, right, we can remember their role in our lives. And we believe that ancestral veneration is key to wellness and healing and transformation. So in all the ways, even in my language, right, it's for others, but also for me to let them know that this is a person that lights my life as a beloved and elevated ancestors. And I get to continually speak their names. And so that was my pastor, my childhood pastor, who transitioned earlier this year to the realm of the ancestors, who was played a huge role in my upbringing and shaped, my religious and spiritual worldview, and I didn't know at the time that like the church I went to was kind of like a liberation theology church. And liberation, or particularly Black liberation theology, is deeply concerned with the social and political life and experiences of the people, right? So what are people dealing with socially? Like how, like with oppression, economic disenfranchisement, our health and things like that. And so I just saw my pastor really modeling in the church at large this deep regard for Black people and what they were going through. So I saw my pastor on the front lines. I saw him going toe to toe with police. I saw him taking our superintendent to task. I saw him calling out preachers he saw exploiting poor and working class Black people. And I saw him also, and I was with him a lot, making house visits and going to the nursing homes. And so when I was 16 and I felt the call to preach, right? He was like, okay, but we go to the nursing home, and it oriented me around like what does care look like actually for people. And it's like, we have to go to where the people who are marginal are, right? Who are often forsaken and forgotten, right? So many of our Black elders, as they age, where we should be sitting at their feet, they're often dismissed and pushed to the back. And so that was like my childhood, you know, taking care of those who stand in the need, but also doing incredible social service. Like we were hugely invested in the education of Black children. And so there was Sunday school, there was vacation Bible school. There were,
I grew up going to
there were just
Bible school.
There was just all kind of education, right? There, and that was hugely inspirational for me. And it was also very Black, wearing dashikis, like talking about the Black experience, right? Being angry at what happens to Black people and seeing that across the pulpit on Sundays, right? You know, so when I think about it in many ways, because even as a young person in high school, I was going to churches, working in communities, singing with other young people, sharing the gift of God. And so if I'm honest, I've been a spiritualist for the majority of my life, right? I've been looking to the divine. I've been looking to God to answer and to give insight on the realities of my life. And because I was so desperately in need of help, and I would even say salvation myself, right? To be saved from these systems that make life often so precarious for Black people.
Yeah. One thing I want to mention is, you know, I grew up in the Black church, but my roots are in Connecticut. And it's so very different hearing your experience. Like, I didn't see pastors or preachers like really on the front lines or doing like really in the community. I mean, they did do what you're describing, like with the nursing homes and that kind of thing. But outside of that, that was it. And like, you know, the just strong show of Black community and support it feels very Philly. Like I you know, I told you before, I spent some time there for school. I went to Temple, so I had that North Philly, and I had that experience and being like an observer of the community there from an outside perspective. And it definitely, what you're describing, it just feels very Philly. Like I'm sure there are other cities around the country like this, but it just feels very Philly to me.
No, I think you're absolutely right. As someone who's lived there, like Philly, there's just a particular type of energy, and because it's historically it is a very blue collar city. It is a majority Black and people of color city, right? And so there is just amongst the people, like, you know, this presence and also this like very visceral response in my experience growing up to, you know, social ills. And, you know, and there's so many movements, right? You know, justice and liberatory movements that have been huge in Philly, been founded in Philly, have happened through Philly. You know, we think about, you know, the movement to release, you know, political prisoner Mumia Abu-Jamal. Like I grew up seeing that, right? And that was just like the backdrop of my life, and also this understanding in Philly, like Black people will let you know that they don't fuck with the police. Right? Like it's very common in Philadelphia, right? This energy, like you're gonna know how I feel, right? And word, but also in my embodied performance. And so I'm glad that you said that, because it's a very Philly thing. And I'm grateful for that, because it shaped me a lot.
Yeah. Another thing that's coming across as very Philly from my experience is I've lived in various cities. So Philly to me this is not really a word. It's a very spiritual city. I feel there's so many different types of religions that people practice, and they're like you said, they're rooted in community. I remember I spent some time with a community of people who follow Islam, and it was just like it was such a moving experience just to again be an observer. Like you, I worked in journalism, and you often are observing people and just getting to know, and it's just like a very interesting way to get to know a city and a group of people. And so that's coming across too as very Philly, as you having that like combination of spiritual activism and community. So that's beautiful. And
I'm so glad you pointed that out, because it's so distinct in Philly, like the Muslim community, which I'm inherently a part of because my family, right? My dad is Muslim, and, my dad being a construction worker, and like, he's a Leo, his birthday's coming up, and he has like a very mayoral type presence, and, loves his hood, loves where he's from. And I also saw my dad doing this spiritual activism and preparing, those who transition. He is one of the people who's called on, like in Islam, there is a particular way that bodies are prepared, right? And my dad does that sacred work, right? Of washing and preparing, these bodies, right? As they prepare for the grave and for the other side. And it's just like, it took me to my adulthood to really presence myself to that deep care. My mother being a person who will do repasts, right? And read obituaries, right? And read cards, like ritually, right? Like people just know to call my mother. And like all of that is death work, right? All of that is community work. All of that has like social and political, implications and spiritual implications. And this is just stuff that Black people do. But like, this is like the rich, like tapestry that I grew up in, right? That has created, all that's kind of like emerging now in the public work that I do.
And what has made you the beautiful soul you are today. So.
Thank you.
Okay. So I want to talk more about how you offer support to your community. So for people who may be interested in working with you or someone like you, why would they want to work with you? Maybe you can start there, and like, what does that mean to get spirit care or any of the other types of spiritual services you offer?
Yeah, such a good question. I'm in the marketplace, which I call it, right? Basically where people are to one, make my presence known, and to let people know that I have a word, and I've always had a word in me. And that comes from this deep prophetic tradition and Christian tradition, Black prophetic tradition, that there is a word for Black people, right? That there is a word, and a word that opens eyes, a word that gives a balm, a word, right, that transforms lives, a word that helps people to see themselves rightly and newly, a word that brings peace in the midst of war, a word that strengthens people when they are weak. And so that's why I'm there. I know I'm not for everybody, right? I know that, right? And I believe, though, that with the gifts that I've been given as a spiritual person, as a seer, right? And so inside of being a spiritualist, right, that can look like many things for many people, right? I am a particular type of spiritualist. So like, I am a hoodoo conjure person, which speaks directly to African-American slave religion, right? And so which is a practice that most people who experienced, actually all people who experienced chattel slavery, right, they engaged in, right? And so it is through that history. I'm a descendant of people who were enslaved, right, who had spiritual practices that they brought with them from the continent of Africa. And of course, change with time and space and place and geography and all of those things. But like, that is the tradition. I'm a practitioner of slave religion, but I'm also, I am a medium, right? Which is a type of spiritualist, meaning that I am an intermediary between this waking world that we know and the life in the spiritual world, or the other side, right? There's so much language for that. And so, and I'm an espiritista, which is, a type of spiritualist and worker in a tradition called Espiritismo Cruzado, right, which is a Caribbean African-based tradition where folks engage with ancestors and spirit guides as a spiritual technology for multiple reasons. And then I started preaching at 16. And so it's really like all of these things kind of came together in addition to my background in public health, working, doing direct service with, some of the most sick and important people, I would say, of the world, right, who live in Philadelphia, elders, babies, children, those with chronic illnesses. And a couple years ago, when I was facing tremendous amounts of sickness in my body, and hardships and all kinds of manner of issues, it was the life of spirit. It was my engagement with my ancestors and the spirits that hold me, that transformed, sustained, and healed my life, and in just an incredible way. And I was asked by my ancestors to create space for others, right? To share a word with others, not on some like, I have the answers for you, I am some guru. And it's like, no, I have a word that can be empowering, and I come with a form of medicine that can help you tend to some of the wounds that you are experiencing in your life. And so as a spiritualist, and my offerings now, like spirit care, right, that I have a, an offering called spirit care and resourcing, right? And that usually happens after someone gets a reading with me or divination, where I essentially am connecting with that person's spiritual team, right? Because from an African, cosmology and paradigm and world sense, we understand that we never come into the world alone, and that inside of this notion of God, there are all these other emissaries and primordial deities and supports, right? Literally a support system and matrix of support that every person has, right? First being our ancestors, right? And so I am gifted with the ability to connect, right, with those ancestors and those spirit guides as a medium, with a gift I've always had since I've been consciously remember was 11, when my great grandmother, from Charlotte, North Carolina, when she transitioned, she came to me when I was living in Westchester, Pennsylvania, and after she transitioned, because I was very, very, very depressed and very sad. And it wasn't even something that I talked to people about, even in my family, because I just thought it was I had this incredibly, vivid imagination. But that was the moment. And I also have a sister, Jaquay Ashley Pitts Ibaye. We're only 10 and a half months apart, who also transitioned. And I've always felt her with me, all my life, in ways that I can describe, and some that are inexplicable, right? And because we were, quote unquote Irish twins, right? These people speak about this deep divine connection. And so all my life, I felt her with me. And while she was here on this plane, she was very much my protector and very much spoke on my behalf. And all my life, I always felt her presence, and also seeing her presence in me always being blessed with these sacred sibling type friendships. And so, that spiritual gift, me coming into African and African diaspora traditions, helped to nourish and really contextualize, a lot of the gifts, right? The intuitive gifts, the spiritual gifts that were already present, right? When I was in my Black Baptist church, right? My ability to discern when people are going through various difficulties, right? And challenges. And I would just know what will be happening in the congregation. I could sense what will be happening in people's homes, right? And what they were dealing with, they were bringing to the altar. And so I would just pray about it and name it, right? And the church would like erupt. And so it is from all of those spaces and places that now I've been able to come and create, you know, a few services that one, help me to shine in my areas of gifting, right? And also to provide that spiritual care that I saw my pastor doing, right? Coming alongside people, right? Walking with people in spiritual life, you know what I mean? And what I do is, you know, I have a gift to be able to basically like ring in, you know, heaven and saying like, hey, we need support here, right? How can we navigate through these times, right? Give us guidance, give us direction, give us help, give us aid and medicine. And so in the services that I presently offer, that's what I do. And my work is specifically for Black people and by extension, people of African descent. But my focus, right, is on Black queer, Black trans, Black disabled, Black mentally ill people, and also Black survivors and people who have experienced sexual assault and sexual violence. Because, and people say, why these particular groups? Because those are all of my identities, right? I'm very Black, I'm very queer, right? To be like, when I say I'm genderqueer, right? It means that my gender is Black and it is queer and it cannot be held or known inside a colonial binary, gender binary, right? I am that I am, right? And I'm disabled, living with several chronic illnesses, right? I have complex PTSD, right? And a memory disorder because I have survived many, many things in my body and mind. They know it. And so with that, I wanted to really create a container where I saw myself, but I also saw the communities and the people that I'm connected to, right? And unfortunately, in this world, because of anti-Blackness and because of patriarchy, because of ableism, because of all the systems, these particular groups, right, are often dispossessed, disposed, erased, murdered, maimed, right, in disproportionate ways. And so my spiritual work or my ministry is also deeply political, right? It's a political project because, you know, I feel like all of our liberation, all people on the planet is tied up with the liberation of Black trans people, right? You know, and Black queer people and Black disabled people and Black poor people. And so that's why I have my services. That's who it's for. Like I'm down to read for any Black person, right? Should they be consenting and we are aligned? But my work is specifically geared towards those communities, which is the communities that I belong to. And it's also what I can speak to, if I'm honest, right? And what, you know, as a person. So, yeah.
Cool. Okay. So, thank you for explaining all of that. In terms of like engaging with you, is there any like, I don't know, recipe to how often someone after coming for a reading or other sessions should engage? Do you like keep ongoing relationships similar to like a preacher would or a therapist? Like, how does that normally go?
That's such a good question too. You ask all the right questions. So I always tell folks like, don't raw dog the internet, right? Don't raw dog the internet. It is not safe, right? Let's do some harm reduction work, right? Let's reduce some risks. And I invite people, the first thing I invite people to do is to book a Kiki session with me. And that's just like, yo, let's talk, right? Let's key for a moment. Let's come with questions to ask me because you don't know me. You saw me on the internet, right? And you seeing me on the internet doesn't necessarily mean that I'm the person for you, right? And so this is an opportunity for people to ask questions, for them to ask me about my politics, to ask me about my values, to ask me about money, right? To ask whatever things that we need to ask. And I encourage people to actually ask. And so the Kiki session is also a space, what I tell people is like for you to get to know me so that you can go back to yourself and to whatever that you believe in to discern and consider, am I the person for you? Right. And I invite people to say, wait till you get a response or something that lets you know, yes. Right. Because you should be coming to me because I said so.
Yeah.
Right. You should be coming to me because you feel compelled and led that like I can provide some care for you, that those you entrust, meaning yourself, right, as your protector, but also if it's God, if it's Jesus, if it's Allah, your ancestors, if it's the Orishas or whatever, your tradition is, right, that you feel, right, within yourself that you can come. And so that's usually the first way people can engage with me, because I'm also just like, I'm not going to round away John, right? And it's like, we just talk, right? And sometimes people just want to learn, right? And they just want to get connected. Some people book a Kiki session with me and we don't talk for a year, right? And then they may book a session, right? Other things that people do, I do various things. Like I'm on a podcast now. Sometimes I'm popping up. My best friend, J.T. Perry, who I went to high school with, has a spiritual academy, the Cecilia Weston Spiritual Academy. She is also Black and queer and disabled. Of them from Philly. And I often teach in her class, right? And I get invited to teach or to share or to lecture. Like I lecture at universities, talking about, Black life. And so I get people from a variety of spaces and places. And sometimes people come for a one-time thing, which is totally fine. And then sometimes, people, they're coming there and, I am their spiritualist who they go to. Like I am the diviner they go to. I am, the coach. Cause like, I've been coaching people professionally. And that's also, I think, important to uplift, I worked as a transformational coach working in public high schools, primarily in Philadelphia, but also across the country. I have coached and worked with young people as a programmer and developer in Eastern Europe, right? And so like, in terms of people coming to me, I think it's also because like I have like a practice, right? I have a pedagogy, I have values that root what I do. And I think because also in how I share my gift is couched in the things that I value, the people that I value, the communities that I value. And so I have found that I do actually kind of function like a pastor.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I find myself, I'm like, wow, I'm going my best. This is like pastoral care. Literally this morning, I was in prayer with a dear friend of mine as they were having an important experience in their life and they wanted some covering, right? And I was up 8-something this morning praying with them, right? My DMs are me talking primarily to Black, queer, trans, disabled people and listening, right? And holding space. And so, but in the formalized, like reading divination, some people just, they come to me one time, but sometimes some people, I realize, oh, this is my community, right? These are my kinfolk, because even being pastoral, right, these people also take care of me. And so that's also been a beautiful part of it, because for me, it's not just transactional, right? It's not just about, I'm here to perform this service. It's like, for me, it's bigger than that. It's like, oh, our ancestors have said yes to aligning in a particular type of way.
It's communal.
In service of some healing and transformation. Like this is, which is why, like, for a lot of my clients, because of disenfranchisement, right, I'm reading them and there is no payment, right? And there is, no cost, because it's like, if you're in dire straits, what do I look like, right? Saying like, oh, money is a barrier. We always figure it out. What that means, if they just get the service because they deserve and they need, and I have the capacity, right, to do it. Or for those who, are in different financial situations, we create payment plans or we barter. We figure it out, but I'm just a true advocate that those who are most marginalized, right, and who are desiring spiritual care, they need it and deserve it the most. And I don't want to be a barrier to that care, even though I can't provide for everybody and I'm limited my capacity, but in how I show up, in the politics, in the values, considering that like actually the majority of Black people are actually poor and working class. That's actually still reality, right?
Yes.
And so accessibility is an important tenet. And so people come and they hang out. And right now I'm just doing one-on-one work, but soon will be, providing more type of holistic care and programs, because I love building programs for Black people to learn about themselves. So, yeah.
I was going to ask you about that, about barriers and costs and all of that.
Yeah.
But first, so, this podcast is about mental health and discussing mental health and just keeping those conversations nice and open. And I, have a background in a Black church, like I said, and many people like me grew up with the idea of, if something is not right, you go see your pastor, or, you talk to your pastor. So this feels similar, but maybe a little expanded than just talking to your pastor, a little more expanded when it comes to you. So if someone is dealing with mental health or mental illness, you said you do work with people with mental illness, Black people with mental illness. How do you find yourself being helpful to them? And do you think it's like a legit alternative to talk therapy, or is it just like something additional? What are your thoughts on that?
This is a good question. And so to kind of answer it, and this is where like I get in my scholarly bag. And because I'm always foregrounding the conversation and I try to in Black thought, right? And Black social formations, right? And Black cosmologies, right? And so there's this concept called the African religious complex that was coined and created by Dr. Katrina Hazard Donald, who lives in Philadelphia, is a hoodoo, is also a priest of Ogun, and is also an incredible dance and religious scholar and sociologist. She is the truth. She wrote a book called Mojo Working, the old African-American hoodoo system. And she talks about the African religious complex. And this African religion complex is where she highlights all of this common thread that you see in African traditions in the diaspora, but also on the continent. And they have these tenets, one of them being naturopathic medicine, another one being ancestral veneration, another one being counterclockwise sacred circle dancing, another one being divination, another one being belief in spiritual cause of malady, right? Then there's the principle of sacrifice, spirit possession, and water immersion. And so, in this survey of looking at all of these things, right, she highlights this because she saw how this, even in enslaved people, it showed up. And the reason why I brought that up, because I want to highlight this belief in spiritual cause of malady, right? And so in the African cosmology, in the African spiritual view, there is no separation between the sacred, right, and secular, right? The divine is in all, through all aspects of life, right? It's concerned about the comprehensive existence of all sentient beings, right? And so from that perspective, because we are descendants, right, we are African people, right, this notion of any type of unwellness, right, in the African view, the thing is to always look to spirit. And there are literal doctors, right? And I think sometimes it's hard for people to even like imagine, right, the fact that like we come from doctors, we come from these hugely, very well organized, like medical industrial systems, right, as African people. And so like the idea of like spiritual life being able to help, right, with any unwellness, be it mental unwellness, physical unwellness, that's just commonplace for African people and African descended people. But I think when we think about colonialism and how we've arrived into the places and spaces that we are in, right, it kind of feels a bit disjointed, right? And so, yes, like what I do, the practices that I engage in, right, as a spiritualist, as in my ancestral practices, as also a person who is engaged in Orisha devotion and veneration, right? Many people come to these traditions and have historically come to these traditions because of the mental health challenges they experience in their life. And that's just true of Black people, if we're honest, right? Dealing with what we deal with, right? Coming to meet the needs. And it's about like, it's this old, ancient, and sacred medicine, right? With the understanding too, right, with these cosmology is that the body, mind, spirit are all interconnected, right? And that like they all inform one another, right? And so as a person who has survived traumatic things, as someone with compounding and complex PTSD, one of the reasons why I love the spiritual traditions that I engage in so much, I always tell people, it's like the woo-woo is cute, right? I'm a person of affect, right? Aesthetic, right? I'm a Taurus sun, so Venusian vibes, like the pleasure of art and beauty are my things, right? And I'm engaged in traditions because of their utility, right? And the way that they do work to meet so many of my needs, right? Like the mental health, improvements that have happened in my life, right? And through these practices have been paramount, right? And let me be very clear, I still was engaged with going to therapy for years, right? Talk therapy. And I am committed to also engaging in other therapies that can work for my Black, queer, trans, disabled self. And, what I think these spiritual practices do is they help me to be able to access the things that are for me and help to remove the obstacles, right, that get in the way of me accessing, the modern day science, right, which is really important. Like I'm very interested and invested in all the technologies that are being developed, to help us to heal, like and the therapeutic modalities that are coming up, and especially from Black people. And so I'm an advocate, like if it works for you, right, please go to therapy, right? If it's accessible for you, if you can find a space, but if you can't find clinical talk therapy, right, I think what the spiritual practices offer, and that's talk about this in spirit care resourcing, they are not therapy, but they are therapeutic modalities, right? I lead people in meditation. Every single client, I lead them in meditation, and meditation is so incredibly helpful for those of us with complex PTSD, those of us with anxiety, right? There's so many studies on the richness of that, but like for many practitioners, right, for many priests, right, inherent in their practice is a deep commitment to meditation, right? Almost every priest or practitioner I know, they have some sort of meditative practice, and that alone, right, we know what the studies have shared about how that really helps us with our neuroplasticity, healing the nervous system, regulation, right, and be able to de-escalate when we are in our fight, flight, or freeze modes, right? So absolutely, like there are so many aspects of these traditions that are deeply, deeply therapeutic, but also have other implications, right? It's kind of like all tethered and tied in because it's supposed to be. But I also don't believe in like romanticizing these traditions, right? Because it's people like practicing these traditions, right? And a really fucked up and broken world that doesn't work for Black people. And so, I don't say like these, come into these traditions and you're going to be made whole, right? Like that's not what I'm saying. And I'm like, come to these traditions if you feel called to come to these traditions and you're being led to them, right? Find the therapeutic modalities that work for you. I think African-centered practices can be very, very, very powerful because they are intended to be so, because our ancestors were thinking of all of these things pre-colonially, like trauma ain't like a new invention, right? You know what I'm saying? like we've been dealing with these things, and also recognizing the ways like we have been engaged, I always tell people, in therapeutic modalities just in our lives, right? And like kind of like bearing witness to that. I think it's helpful when moving towards new stuff, right? Focus on the old and what has been primitive and helpful for you, because they can be guideposts for you, so as you enter to a new landscape.
I love that. And you mentioned earlier in our conversation something about how you always felt this like connection to your ancestors and how that's grounded you. And I think when we're talking about Black people of the diaspora, well, for me, I've always felt this connection to people I've never known, too. And that were, that was a really big part of me believing in God or higher power, because I'm like, wow, my people, like what they came through, and how they still created such rich traditions and, beautiful culture. And like, anyway, so that I'm vibing with you there. I get that. So you kind of touched on cost and barriers, which we both know can be a big issue for Black people, specifically, to access like mental health care. And I think you kind of answered already that you wouldn't suggest this as like a fixer or like a, one thing, like the one thing to do for someone who needs mental health care. But it seems like it would be, if you are drawn to it, as you said, a good start in terms of like taking care of yourself and rooting yourself. Yeah,
absolutely. It's like, if you're feeling compelled and called and just interested in just knowing about your ancestry, your ancestors, right? With this ancestral veneration, I think people should pursue that, and also pursue it with care, because of the ways that Black people historically, through the making of this world, have been subjected to so much spiritual harm and violence, right? And just psychological warfare, right? And, when I talk about the imposition of the West, right? Western thought, Western ways of being onto Black people, like we don't often understand that as coercive, as the violent acts and continue acts that it was. And so the making of the world has literally happened through, right, terror, through violence, through coercion, right, which all produces psychological terror. So like that's like just like that just foregrounds like really the world, like that has been made, right, colonially and post-colonially, right, like that has arrived us to this moment. And so I think for Black people, like I'm always talking about how we got to be with the ways that like a religion, a way of being was like literally forced onto, right? That was violence, right? Right? Like that's mental anguish, right? That people are in, right? And I'm always was interested. It was like, how were Black people responding, resisting, and healing that, right? And that was through, slave religion, right? And I keep uplifting her, Dr. Katrina Hazard-Donald, because she just beautifully writes this seminal text that talks about slave religion as such an important part of the psychic life of everyday Black people inside of chattel slavery, right? And like, and how important it was to people's everyday livelihood and well-being. And it's like, for me, when we really, as a person who studies and looks into our archives and really thinks critically about literally the institution of slavery and the barbarism, like for me, I just sit back and wonder, right? There's a song that says like, my soul looks back and wonders how I got over. Right. And that's why also, I sing hymns, right? I used to have a a clubhouse room called Psalms, Hymns, and Spiritual Songs, Slave Religion for an Impossible World, because inside of these very Christian songs, right, inside of these things, you see this African, deeply African, West African, Central African world sense that is there, right? My soul looks back and wonders how I got over. Is the songwriter is like, yo, let us make meaning, right, about the miracle of survival, right, inside of a world and a system where there was no freedom, but somehow we made it, right? And I think that prowess, right, and I don't mean like we've survived all intact, right, but like what is that magic? What is that power? What is that medicine that we had to sustain and to heal ourselves? And that's also why I'm interested in these traditions, because they help you to go back and fetch those things. And I want to know, because eventually, like, I'd be depressed.
Oh my God, I can so relate to this. So yeah, I want to ask you a question about someone who may be skeptical, because obviously I'm sure you've encountered that, I would assume. And you know, it's typical. So what would you say to someone who is skeptical of spiritualism and spirit care?
Yeah, I will say honor the reality of what's happening in your body, right? Listen to, you know, all of the things. Like, our body is this really fascinating, you know, system, and it tells us stuff, right? You know, it communicates to us, right? And it's like, before entrusting in anyone else, entrust in the person who's been with you longer than anyone else. That's you, right? You know, I always tell people, like, they're like, I'm feeling a lot of fear. I'm like, okay, you should be with that fear, right? And explore it and get curious about it, like, genuinely, right? Just be like, hey, why are you here? Are you like a little friend who is indicating to me that maybe I should pause, right? Right? Or maybe it's an indicator to say, oh, maybe you should have some supportive tools to support your mental, emotional, and psychic well-being before you take this step, right? Or maybe you don't fuck with me, or you don't believe, right? Right? And I think belief for all of these things are at the core of it, right? Like, part of this, right, why I do all of this is rooted in belief. I believe in God, right? I believe in spirits and guides and forces and primordial energies. I believe in talking to trees. I believe that you can get something from the plant outside your door. All of that is rooted in belief and a type of childlike faith that has been cultivated, right, in my life, right? And so my lived experience is not like everybody else's. So you don't believe. There's shit that I didn't believe that I practice now that I did not believe 10, 15 years ago, right? That's the thing. It's like, I was, at one point in my life, I was a condemner of my own self, right? And the future me, right? And so, you know, I have a lot of like space, right, for wherever, particularly if you're a Black person, wherever you may be, like, in your belief or your unbelief, right? Like, one of my favorite prayers is, you know, that I say all the time, is that I believe, yes, but like God, ancestors, spirits, Orisha, help my unbelief, because like that is very, very, very real, right? And so I myself, like, I am a skeptic, right? I myself am like a very curious cat, and like very like gregarious, and I want to know everything, right? But I think that's also inside of there's a lot of goodness, because I also come from a history and communities of people who have been manipulated, who have been oppressed, and have been lied to through the project of Christianity, because it was a project, right? Through all of these other religious forces that are coerced onto people without their consent, right? And so I think a lot of the skepticism that people have is healthy and can be generative. And so I'm always just like, be with it and consider what it's trying to communicate to you. Listen to that. And then if you need to go outward, get wisdom and guidance from other people that you trust, right? Who you know that love you, who see you and want your highest good, to get that added level of like wisdom, understanding, and to make a choice, right? Or book a session with me to talk. Because, for some people, they want to really talk with me like scholarly, right? Because that's like, that's like for them, that's like an entry point, and that's a space of strength for them. You know what I mean? And so, though I'm not an academic, right, and I got sometimes a lot of beef with academics, right, and rightly so, because of the ways often they engage with these sacred traditions in just disrespectful ways. And I also know that like scholarship, right, can be a vehicle through which people can get connected to these systems because they are deeply, deeply like are just replete with so much like intellectual rigor, right? And just theoretical, just all kind of like good stuff. And so I'm with it, right? And I think it's my experience as a professional in the world. I'm a cultural worker, right? And there are things that like I research and study, right? Like I'm a Black religious scholar, right? And so I know a lot about not just the things I practices, but like Black religions, right? Black Atlantic religions, right? And so I find that some people want to have those type of conversations, and I'm glad that like I have some stuff in me where I can meet them there. And so I'm like, I'm kind of with it, right? Because I believe in intellectualism, because that also that's who we've been, right? As people, and I believe in that like rigor and thought, and I believe that the imagination is a potential site of like abolition and healing, and so the life of the mind is important, and I'm okay with people being like, I don't know, right? Like, I don't know, right? And so that's okay.
Yeah. Love it. Okay. Well, Hakim, this has been a great conversation. We could probably keep going, but maybe we can do that another time. But I wonder if you have any important takeaways that you like to leave people with as we wrap up.
Yes. I'll say something that my Auntie Kim would say to me all the time. And she's a griot and a storyteller and an incredible person who really helped me to understand a lot about my ancestry, who I was. And she would always say, you are seen, you are loved, and you are regarded. And I was like, what does that mean? And she's like this very mystical Black woman. And, in times where I'll be going through things, she would, or feeling small, she would say, you are seen, right? And in the African thought, we believe that we come from and always have around us this great cloud of witnesses, right? Those who have come before us, who are watching over our lives, who want to engage with us, who want to let them know, want to let us know that they see us, right? And what we're going through, and they have a helping hand, that you are loved, right? Loved, right? Not for what you do, right? Because you come from love, right? That love is your essence, is your being, right? Because you come from a collective of beloved others, right? Your ancestors, your egbe, as we talk about in our tradition, meaning your spiritual community in heaven, right? And you are regarded, meaning that you have this value, and you should be, right, treated in a way in light of being seen, in light of being loved. And in a world that in so many ways casually, right, and devastatingly, like makes us feel like we are the antithesis of all of those things, I like to just remind people that you are seen, that you are loved, and that you are regarded by God, by your ancestors, and by us, by me, by you, because we're here having this conversation, right?
Yes.
And so that's what I want to say to people. And may we see ourselves and love ourselves and regard ourselves because of those who are seeing us, So that's my hope and my prayer and my, last words for everybody. And I hope that this conversation was a blessing or, illuminated someone's day or their path. So that's what I'm excited and hopeful for.
It illuminated my day.
Yes!
I feel seen. And when you said that, I thought of my auntie who raised me, and
yes,
I don't know if she ever said that to me, but I feel like she did. So
yeah, because sometimes we feel that, right? We feel that so viscerally from people in our lives that it's like their lives like say, "Yeah, I see you, baby," right?
Yeah. Well, she's an ancestor now, but
yeah, I felt that.
Yeah. So. Thank you again. I want to let people know where they can find you and follow you and get all your good words.
Yes. Folks can follow me at Keem, Keem, has the dream on social media. You can find me there talking and saying things on Twitter, on Instagram. Both of those places have links to my landing pages, which speak about the spiritual work and offerings that I have currently. You can also email me if you have questions or inquiries at Hakim, Hakim, at dream, DREAM with WITH, Hakim, HAKIM.com. And I'll be glad to engage and get back to you. And so are the ways that people can get in touch with me for now. So yep.
Awesome. Yeah.
Thank you.
I'll include all of that in the show notes. So
yes. Thank you. Appreciate that.
No problem. Again, thank you. Like I said, this has really brightened my day, and I'm so grateful to you. And I hope you have a great day, rest of your day.
Yes, you too.
Thanks. Thank you again to my guest, Hakim Pitts. This episode was filled with so much goodness and light and education, information, and I couldn't be more grateful for my amazing guest. This episode will not be ending with a mindful moment as we typically do, but Hakim has graciously provided one, and that will be posted shortly. So look out for that. And don't forget to support the show by visiting merch.lutdpodcast.com. Have a good day, y'all.